Please allow me to quickly introduce our guest speaker today. I'm so sorry I didn't realize that you had arrived, and so I'll quickly get out of your way. Michael here is a founder of a company which is only 1 year old.
2 years.
2 years old, and is doing very successful business. He has a very unique model, and I would like him to share that with you. Michael, please introduce yourself.
Sure. Yep.
Sorry, I didn't get your scene.
Oh, I use this too.
Yeah, just this.
Okay. Good. Is it up or should I need to? I'm just trying to start the slideshow. Okay. Oh yeah, that makes sense. Is it either one of these mics or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
This would work better than this one.
Okay. Yeah, so my name is Mike. I'm from Top Monaco. I guess what I'll do is I'll tell you a bit about our business and kind of how we got started in the context of, I guess, the subject matter, which is commercialization of technology. We did come out of the University of Waterloo, so it kind of, I guess it does fit the theme pretty nicely. In a nutshell, what we do is we provide a platform for interactive learning in the classroom. It's actually a pretty cool technology. If you guys have been in the classroom in the last little while, you have probably seen how teaching is done in the old way, and what we're doing is really changing that pretty radically with the variety of technologies that we've developed. So, in a nutshell, the whole education space, including higher education, which is where we're focused, is kind of this industry that's been in kind of a deep freeze for a very long time now. If you look at a classroom in the 1960s, it looked something like this. You have a person standing in the front, lecturing to a large group of people. And here's a lecture hall today. It's the same thing. This is, I mean, you're talking 50 years, and it's essentially exactly the same thing. With one exception, which is this, PowerPoint, which has kind of come to dominate over the last 15 years or so, university lecture halls. Most people are not too happy with that, that outcome. Now, the thing that we know quite well, based on tons of studies that have been done, is this method called didactic teaching, where you're just, one person is standing there trying to kind of funnel information into the head of a whole bunch of other people, doesn't work very well. It's actually very ineffective. It's one of the least effective ways of teaching people. Now, the other interesting thing is that we actually know what does work better in terms of teaching and education. And this is called active learning. We've known this for a really long time. This is a graph from 1987. It shows that the idea of engaging students in the learning process, in other words, making them active participants in the learning process rather than just passive observers, works much better. It's far more effective. Students have higher satisfaction. They retain way more material. If you look at studies that evaluate how much students retain after a traditional style of lecture, where a professor kind of talking to the students without any interactivity, you'll find that literally 5 minutes after the lecture, when they do surveys of the students as they come out of the lecture hall, they retain something like 10% of content that was actually taught. So if you don't allow for cramming, which is basically how most people get through university, there's almost no value in the lecture experience. Which is pretty staggering considering how much effort goes into putting up these buildings where people go to lectures, professors taking huge amounts of time to prepare these lectures, and it's providing minimal value. So there's various reasons why this is the case, why we know something doesn't work, but it's being done the same way for a really long time. And you'd probably be right about what most of these reasons are if you kind of guessed as to what they tend to be, but I'll talk about it more in the context of, I guess, the education space. One of the major reasons why there's so little innovation in education is really painfully long sales cycles to universities. Like, it's really hard to get new technology and new products into schools. You're talking 2 to 5 years is how long it takes to actually sell a product to a school. which is crazy. I mean, if you look at something like any consumer market, you're talking weeks or months to how long it takes you to actually get something into someone's hands. At schools, it's a massively complicated process. Schools have constant funding shortages. I mean, I don't think anyone has ever heard a university official say they have too much money and they don't know what to spend it on. And there's an impenetrable bureaucracy. You know, if you want to get into a school, it's very rare that the best product wins. That almost doesn't enter into the equation. Usually there's a very complicated RFP, request for proposal, process that everyone has to go through. And you have just a list of checklists, a checklist that a product needs to satisfy. And then once they've satisfied that, they become the product, along with, of course, a lot of sales that goes into that. But then, a few years ago, something magical happened in the education space. These things showed up, mobile devices. All of a sudden, in the span of just a few years, students suddenly got, every single one of them, pretty much without exception, got a mobile device. So whether that's an iPhone or an Android or an iPad or a laptop. Back when I graduated, which was fairly recently, 2007 is when I finished my engineering degree, maybe about 50% of students had a laptop. Maybe another 50% had cell phones. Nobody had smartphones at that time. Today, those numbers are completely different. Today, essentially 98% of students incoming to university have laptops. 98% have cell phones. About 60% these days have smartphones. Probably every single person in this room has a smartphone at this point. So this is pretty exciting because what it means is you can bypass that impenetrable bureaucracy. Now, because students have this technology that they bring with them, you can bring technology into the classroom without going through the bureaucracy, without having to convince the school to install terminals at every desk, you know, to do active learning. You can just make use of the technology that's already in the classroom brought in by the students. And that's what we do. So this is kind of what our product looks like. We don't exclusively work on Apple devices, but they're the prettiest, so that's why we have them in the picture. This is just to give you kind of a visual cue of what our product looks like. This is a teacher console where they launch activities, and then students participate in those activities inside the classroom using their smartphone or a cell phone. And then the professor immediately sees that feedback from the students, and so they can kind of alter their lecture style or generally kind of improve their teaching process over time. And specifically what we do is, as I mentioned, polls and quizzes. As I said, basically that's the professor launches a button, the quiz pops up on the students' devices, they answer it, and 2 seconds later the professor sees the results on their computing device. Interactive demonstrations where the professor launches an interactive activity, like let's say it's a chemistry lecture, the professor would launch like a chemical simulation that the student plays with on their smartphone. And then they get to understand the content better. Moderated discussion tools, where if you have like 1,000 students in a lecture hall, and we have actually a couple of those classes going on, where you have 1,000 students using in a single lecture hall using our product, you can actually have discussions with 1,000 students, which is something that would have been very hard to do in the past, and that's all moderated inside the classroom. And you have really nice data analysis tools that the professor can use to improve their teaching style. So how do we thwart the bureaucracy? I mean, we still kind of have to deal with the school, don't we? I mean, I just told you what a difficult market education is, so how did we manage to kind of avoid it? Well, we're doing something pretty interesting. We're taking kind of a grassroots approach, and this is kind of, I guess, the nitty-gritty aspect of commercialization. You know, you come up with a really cool technology that comes out of a university, but the tricky aspect of it that most engineers, myself included, tend to neglect is how do you actually get it into the customer's hands? And this is kind of what we managed to figure out over about a 4-month process of going back and forth and you know, talking to customers in terms of how to get this product into their hands. And so what we do is we take a very old model, which is the textbook sales model. We have our product adopted by the professors, by the teachers, in their classroom, the same way a professor would adopt a textbook. And then the students have a choice of whether they want to participate by purchasing a subscription to our product. So in other words, our sales cycle goes from 5 years of trying to sell to the university to a couple of weeks of showing the product to the professor, making them comfortable with it, and then getting them to adopt it in their classroom. So we get kind of the best of both worlds in that we get very quick adoption, and then eventually the entire school kind of converts and starts using our product as their main classroom interaction system. So it's been going pretty well. Kind of to give you kind of in a nutshell where we're at right now. We launched publicly out of, in other words, out of private beta about a year ago. This was last September. Currently we have over 45 universities across North America using our product. We're about 50-50 split between Canada and the US at this point. Last year when we first launched, it was 100% in Ontario. Probably in about 2 years, it'll be 90% US, 10% Canada. We have about 35,000 students using it, and we're actually making money. We're not, burning investors' money at this point. So things are going pretty well. I guess, if there's one thing I could milk out of this presentation is that we're hiring. So if you know any salespeople or business development people, we're desperately looking for some. So please send them our way. Yeah.
Your company name is Top Hat Monocle.
Right.
And your clients are the teachers. Do they take kindly to that name?
Yeah, actually. So we came up with the product, or with the company name, before we came up with the product. Originally, we were actually very general. We were just a mobile apps company. We wanted to do applications for BlackBerry, iPhone, Android. And then we specialized to mobile apps for education, and then kind of built the product around that, around a few studies at Waterloo. But the thing that we found with the name, which was kind of cool, is people really remembered it. That, like, it really stuck in their heads because it was so weird. And so it's helped us a lot. Like, we're kind of, every person that we meet with remembers at least what our name is, as opposed to kind of, edutech or some generic thing that everyone forgets 5 seconds after they see it.
Right, thanks.
Yeah.
I'm curious, the interactive part, I'm a little past the point where I was a student at the university. The programs that are used, that use your platform, where are they developed? How did you manage to leverage those? Because you didn't develop software for interactiveness, I would gather.
Well, we did, yeah. So that's the product, the thing that facilitates interaction between the professors and the students. Or do you mean the content?
The content.
Oh, so the professors load their own content on it. We also have a library of content that we have a small team that kind of develops content based on professors' needs for various subjects like biology, chemistry, and those kinds of things. And so we're kind of slowly building up our library of content that professors can use. But the majority of content is, I guess, text, like questions and those kinds of things.
That's what I was wondering about, because it takes a lot of effort to, for instance, have a simulation of a chemical process or to medical issues. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I see your product as a framework. Is that correct?
Yeah, a framework or a platform, that's right.
And did you patent it?
Some of our investors were keen on us getting some patents. Others kind of told us it doesn't matter. So we tended to side, at least so far, with the ones that say it doesn't matter. Mostly because we've been really laser focused on getting the product right. And in the end, in terms of, I guess, a competitive advantage, it doesn't really, I don't think it would have added much for us to have patented some components of it.
And just another question, if I can. So your competition, is there a competition of some of the other products that I'm aware of that are not as interactive, like Blackboard, Moodle, something like that?
Blackboard and Moodle are in the LMS space, learning management systems. So currently none of them do any kind of interactivity in the classroom. And just the way they're architected makes it almost impossible for them to do so. Just the technology they're built on doesn't really lend itself well for real-time interaction in class. There are competitors. I guess if you've been to school in the last maybe year or two, you're probably aware of them, and they're called clickers. What those are is they're like plastic remotes that students need to buy. They're about $50 a piece. The professor needs to bring like a receiver into the classroom, and then the professor can do multiple choice questions, and then the student's going to click in their answer, and the professor sees the answers real time. So it's like a hardware solution, very primitive solution that I guess precedes our technology. And they started to become really popular about 5 years ago, before the cell phones became kind of everywhere. And so now they've kind of plateaued, and now they're slowly going on the decline, being replaced by products like ours. And we're, as far as I know, we're by far the largest, I guess, web-based clicker company at this point. Mostly because we got started during a really bad economic time when nobody else was starting companies. And so a couple of other companies have started up doing essentially the same kind of idea that we're doing, but they only started up like 4 or 5 months ago, so we're in a pretty good position right now. Yeah.
One quick question. Could you just simplify and kind of describe what the stages of investment were to get you to this stage?
You mean funding, like
Yeah.
actual angel investment? So we got...
So all the way to the beginning, like when you were just in the lab.
Yeah, so when we were, I guess, in my living room, we got an embarrassingly small amount of money from my brother and a couple of his friends just to survive for a couple of months to build this thing. Then we did an Interact project with OCE, which was like 15K or something. Again, a really small amount of money, just enough to get us to build like another small portion of it. And then I think something like 4 or 5 months later, we closed about 200K in angel funding, and then that carried us for about a year or so. And then we closed a whole bunch of angel money after that, and kind of now we're at a stage where we don't really need it. And of course, you know, SHRED and a whole bunch of other government programs have been really helpful.
So you didn't really go to a VC then, right?
No, we haven't done any VC funding, and we're trying to avoid it.
That's the point I wanted to make, that there are opportunities where you don't need a VC. You could do it just with angel and grant funding.
Yeah, a healthy angel community is far, far more important for a healthy startup hub than a VC community. VCs are good to have, but angels are a necessary condition. VCs, you can kind of, you can go after ones in different regions, but it's that startup phase that's most important. Yep.
I just wondering, did you go through a formal angel network, or was it just informal? In the sense, was
originally
it
was
organized?
informal. Then I think it was in the second round that an angel network participated in, and then in the third round we also had an angel network participate in. Angel networks tend to be very conservative in general and take a very long time. So generally it's not a good thing when they lead the deal. It's good when you get them to participate, but it's tricky when they lead the deal. That's what I'll say, I guess.
Mike, thank you very much for sharing your fascinating story.